All right, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Leadership Blend Live podcast with your host, Ricardo D. Rice, and my co-host,
Simone Sherry.
I swear, I feel like I'm so getting ready to say Blend Blazers because I just did that. I actually do well because it just comes out. Thank God. Because
What's going on?
We don't want to get into that. All right, so today we are here and we have our special guest, and I don't really want to call him guest. Once you've been once, you're not really a guest anymore. You're more like family. So we are so honored to have, especially this guy. He's the man about the streets that is making a huge difference. Attorney Gerald Griggs, how are we doing today, sir?
Doing great. Thank you for having me back. It's always an honor to be with you guys.
Actually, I feel like I should say the president. There's more.
Yes.
Yeah. There's more.
Chairman?
13th president of the Georgia State Conference of the NAACP. Yes.
Which the last time he was here, he was preparing to run, which I knew he was going to win. But, you have to let these things play out. So we're so honored to have you here on that note. So let's jump right into it. Simone, what do we have on the rundown?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about updates for Cop City, which we were just saying is now a national news item. I think that's something we should continue to keep a close eye on. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the response, or maybe lack thereof, from the local administration. And then we can get into some new developments around the change in how we handle female contraception, including a very high-profile lawsuit out of Texas. And if we have a second, we can also talk about some federal news, because there's been some interesting updates and developments from the Biden administration. Maybe we can tie it all back and then get into the real point of this interview, which is exactly what people should know and what we can learn from you, Chairman. I love saying that.
I know it's like what Dana was saying. I was like, President.
Chairman feels a little bit more historical. Maybe that's just me.
It sounds really, really official.
So first, I wanted to start with something that was a little lighter, and it will not take long. But
I just want to say this looks very weird. I'm used to you having a computer, so to see you with like two phones, which I swear one of them is a burner phone.
You got two phones.
Well,
I mean, literally, like you look like a mob boss. What is happening right now?
I'm on probation. Maybe I need to.
You really go break that up.
So,
oh, good Lord.
So really quick, some things to kind of ease us into these subjects today. There have been fake parking tickets issued in downtown Augusta and in downtown Atlanta. So this is a multiple state occurrence, but recently in Augusta, this may be the same scammer. Deputies are not sure. Apparently these tickets look very much like official city issued parking tickets. They come with a QR code and they're essentially a scam. So I think we should all do our best to try to make your way to your local city website. It will usually be a .gov website, not always, but usually, and just make sure that your tickets are valid so that you do not get scammed.
No, I need the backstory. I mean, are they like dressed like meter maids and they're actually giving
They're
out
not people.
tickets?
These are just tickets. So this is assuming that you're not around your car. Usually you're not. Usually you're walking back to your car and then you see a ticket there. There have been six found this year alone, and this is in the Augusta downtown area. There have also been similar looking tickets found in the Metro Atlanta downtown area. So just be careful, folks. But I think this is a very, very creative scam.
So people just randomly go. This is where criminals are getting extremely crafty. That's almost concerning to me. That you can make a document that looks like a government issued document.
It looks
that to the average person, I'd be like, oh my God, I just got a ticket. And I wouldn't think anything about it because I don't go downtown that often. So I'd be like, oh my God, I got a ticket.
You messed up, yeah.
Exactly. I'm dumb enough to actually pay it. And if the process looks the same like the government process, I'm not going to know the wiser. Like, how?
Just be careful.
Well, I mean, this is why if you get a ticket, you need to go to court. Because it's one thing that, criminals can't fake. It's an actual court. So if municipal court in the city of Atlanta, municipal court in Augusta, make them prove that you did whatever the citation says you did. Don't just click on the QR code and pay the fine. That's admitting guilt. At least go through the process.
How many people do you think usually contest their tickets?
Maybe 10%, maybe.
Why is it
That's
so
how
low?
I figured. Actually, I thought he'd say like 9.
I mean, the biggest money-making court in the Southeast is the Atlanta Municipal Court. So I think people, say, well, it's just a traffic offense, it's just a speeding or something like that. I'll just pay the fine and keep moving. And that's what the criminals are paying, are playing off of. And then we are, transitioning into a fully digital world, so they don't think to question anything. But I would always, at least reach out to, municipal court in both jurisdictions to make sure this ticket is in fact valid. And then I would say challenge the ticket.
Yeah.
I mean, we're in this microwave society. I'm not even gonna lie. If I got it, and unless it's a ridiculous price ticket, if it's a $40 or $50 ticket, I'm not even gonna lie. The time I have to take to go to court, and I'll just be like, I don't want to take a day off from work. I don't feel like I would probably just pay it, unless it's like 100 or something. Now I'm like, now wait a minute, you doing a bit much. But
So now we got to do a little education about the other consequences, because I'm sure that is the math people are doing. The quick math is like, well, it's $15 or it's 3 hours in my morning. So aren't there other consequences as well to like?
Oh yeah, there are definitely other consequences. I mean, if this is a parking ticket, you're not going to get points on your license. But if it's a speeding ticket, no proof of insurance, certain other traffic offenses, you're going to get points on your license. And if you get enough points, your license is going to be suspended. And then you're going to be perpetually going to court for driving on suspended license or driving while not licensed. It's a gateway into the criminal justice system. So I'm not just saying that because, I'm an attorney and, we make money off you going to court. I'm saying that because the court makes money off of you not going to court.
That is true.
Well, remember that time I discovered that I was on probation for the ticket I had to be.
Probation.
That I was on probation, paid a ticket, and I didn't think anything about. And the payment plan actually made the ticket more expensive.
Yes.
When they start tacking on
fines and fees, the probation fees, and all those things. Sometimes it's more economical just to pay the fine. But then sometimes when you look at the hidden surcharges and the court fees and the probationary fees, it's better to contest the ticket.
Yeah.
This is true.
Very true.
I was very disgusted.
His shock.
I was flabbergasted
Yeah.
when we discovered I was on probation because I chose
misdemeanor.
a payment plan to pay off a ticket.
Yes.
I literally had to check in I think it was either every week or every 2 weeks. I literally had to check in.
But that's how they collect the money. They don't have a collections agency. If you go on the payment plan, you're on probation.
Yeah, I know now. I'm disgusted.
Yeah.
I know now.
So I'm an offender?
I don't even think I'm
Yeah.
traumatized. That was like 3 years ago. I'm still traumatized because I literally had to check it every week.
Welcome. Okay, so next let's move on to Cop City and updates for Cop City. Judge grants bond for a legal observer at Stop Cop City, but denied for 22 other people. So there were 23 people taken into custody, if you're unaware, after that viral video happened with the flames and the smoke burning up a portion of what has been called Cop City, the $90 million police training facility in Atlanta. The individual granted bond is an attorney, a lawyer and employee with Southern Poverty Law Center. Great organization, by the way, SPLC. Protesters did plan a week of action. It was highly publicized. There were multiple events planned for throughout the week. There was a music component of that entire week, but there were chaos, and ultimately that chaos resulted in property damage, and so there have been arrests.
Right now, this is just open space, right? Right now.
Well, it's a fenced-in space that is secured by law enforcement and private security. But yes, it is undeveloped space. And currently, the protesters are protesting the building of the $90 million public safety training center, also known as Cop City. And many in the community are against it. Some are for it. But they had the week of action with a lot of organizers who came into town to protest, and then they had the destruction that was separate from the festival, the concert that was happening, and that's when the charges came.
And protests are still going on today, yeah? I think
yes, today is the last day of the week of action.
Yeah, so I think that we talked a lot about Cop City. We talked about it when we were still in voting, and when there was, I think, 24 hours worth of public hearings and public testimony just to prevent. So before it was even passed, we've been talking a lot about this. But I am impressed and happy to see like the level of momentum continuing on, because I do think so frequently we fall under like the state of amnesia, like the United States of amnesia.
The hashtags.
I'm excited that there's still momentum in stopping something that is technically already taken off. That makes me happy.
Yeah, I think that's my thing. It's like the likelihood of this not happening. Is it high? I don't feel like it's high. The likelihood is not happening at this point. Like they've secured pretty much.
The lease has been signed. The land has been granted. The court case was dismissed to try to stop the lease. So the substantial likelihood of it being built is very high. But I think that from both perspectives, they've opened a robust conversation about stopping it. And now people are probably going to come to the table at least to have a conversation about it.
Is there any way that this can be a good thing for social justice? I think that's maybe like the underlying question is like, is there a way this can be good? Because I know that there were clergy calling recently for like a community role in the, implementation, or maybe even in like on an ongoing basis. And I'm just trying to sit back and like use my imagination. Like it's not working. Could this somehow become a good thing? Could this like $90 million investment, 2/3 of which is private funds, like could this be good? Could this be like, and I'm just not seeing it.
Well, the position of the NAACP is that, we need more police accountability and not more training. So if they center the voices of those that have been most impacted, namely the families who've lost loved ones in Georgia and Atlanta at the hands of police brutality, maybe. And that's a conversation that we're willing to have. I think that some of the activists are willing to have, but I think a majority of the Stop Cop City activists who've been doing this for a year and a half, almost 2 years, is that it shouldn't be built. Our position at the Georgia State Conference and the NAACP is that we, from the very beginning, said it should not be built. We have not taken part in these particular protests because we are a nonviolent Kingian philosophy organization where we do not engage in any type of violence. And so I think that's what's stalling all of the actual conversations. It's that legacy organizations and grassroots organizers are afraid of the weaponization that is happening around this conversation. Because when you bring, any type of violence into the conversation, you bring the attorney general in, you bring the governor in, you bring DAs in, you bring the courts in, and there could be a very bad outcome to that.
Yeah. And I also just think the political timing of this vote with what was going on at the time, and also like last year and continuing into this year's legislative session, like everything that was happening, not only with all of the high profile court cases and murder cases and murder trials, it was also like the bills that passed to prevent defunding and all these local jurisdictions, which says that, you can't locally control your police, which is supposed to be local control, supposed to be like the backbone of our entire state's philosophy is like local control. But, these bills that came down from the state to say that, like, you can't decrease funding, that made any harm to law enforcement officers, like, almost punishable by indeterminate sentences, but effective life sentences, like all the harshening and strengthening of penalties for any interaction with police that's less than favorable. Like, meanwhile, on the other side, like, one bill that said, okay, we'll stop pursuing people, stop with your citizens' arrest, like maybe one. But like just the wave and like onslaught of legislation, I think has also been really, it's so strangely and like painfully politically timed as well.
I think I just can't get over the price tag. When we have conversations about money,
that's fair,
and all the issues that plague the city, that we were able to piece together $90 million to go to something called Cop City, when we still have not had real conversations about the things we're going to talk about shortly, and homelessness, and I said this last week, homeless problem, people being priced out of their areas, the onslaught of gentrification. We don't have these conversations, but we can scrape up $90 million to do this with a lot of private funding as well. I
think the problem is, the framing of the conversation. If this is truly about law and order, why is the funding not going to prosecutors and defense attorneys and judges and our criminal justice system that actually are the ones that determine whether a crime occurred and if there's going to be punishment? And so my level of anger is generated at the politicians who are politicizing this, and it's not going to solve the problem they're even identifying. More police does not reduce crime. It brings people disproportionately more into contact with law enforcement and the possibility of police violence. And so, when we have these conversations, and I had a disciplined conversation with the governor's staff about the real issues that Georgians are bringing forth, especially communities of color and Black people, they just kind of gloss over and say, but we got to back the blue. And my response is, no, you have to back justice. Because justice matters. It's not about blue lives matter. It's not about Black lives matter. It's about justice mattering. And if you actually look at the law is supposed to be fair and balanced. So when you have a law enforcement officer who violates the public trust, they should be held accountable. When you have a citizen that violates a penal statute, they will be held accountable. So that's the conversation that needs to happen. Why is this arm not being held accountable and being even more funded, where the actual issue that you're trying to talk about, citizen-on-citizen violence, property damage, sexual assaults, none of that's been funded to actually address the underlying issue that we are still coming out of a backlog of a pandemic in the judicial system.
I mean, as part of this, I want to ask if part of this is a federal conversation too, because I think it was just last year. So to have a slightly similar conversation, not just about policing, but just about corrections in general and correctional oversight. Should this be a federal conversation? Is there room, or do you think it's the right move for the federal government to take over and put its hands in these 50 pockets of the United States and decide that these local control when it comes to this is just not going to happen? We are not able to trust a local prosecutor or a local state Supreme Court to enact any sort of real justice for a local police department or local police officer. Does it need to be external control to ensure that accountability happens?
I don't know if it needs to be external control. What I need to happen is the actual enforcement of the law. And so, yes, do we need the Justice Department to come in and have patterns and practice investigation into local police departments? Yes, you saw what just happened in Louisville. You see what's happening in Memphis. I think that type of patterns and practice investigation needs to happen in the city of Atlanta. We've already called for that. But I'm concerned when you have, the federal government dictating to all 50 states what policing should look like, because you might have a friendly administration at one point and then a not so friendly administration a few more years down the road. So that's my concern about that. But I have an even broader concern for the state when they say they want local control, but when the local control is implementing police accountability and community-oriented policing, now you want to take away that local control.
Exactly.
So, I see where you're coming from. I don't know what the solution is at this point, except for let the judicial branch do what the judicial branch does. The executive branch is there to execute the laws. The judicial branch is there to make sure that there is actual enforcement of the law and interpretation of the law.
No, for sure. I think that makes perfect sense. I want to know as well if you think there's something to be said about public investigations, because this has been, I think, after all these conversations that have been had, I appreciate the releasing of footage and stuff like that, after the fact, but I also want to know, should these investigations be public, and is transparency a part of that accountability too? In Cobb County, as of this year, there's been another death of a person who was held in custody in Cobb County Jail, but there's been 7 people total who have died in this new administration in Cobb County jails. The Cobb County Sheriff, I should say. And I think it was just determined maybe a couple of months ago that, the GBI will handle investigations now and no longer allow the department to run its own investigations. But it still blows my mind that anybody can run their own investigation. Can people audit their own taxes? Can I audit my own taxes to make sure that I didn't miss any numbers?
I mean, we could, but how would that end?
It just doesn't work. It does blow my mind that it's even allowed.
Yeah, and I think that there should always be independent investigation. And my issue with a GBI is that when you conduct a, quote, independent investigation but don't release the results to the public, that's a problem. So there were 4 police accountability bills that were pending in the Georgia State House and Senate. Of course, none of them got committee hearings, but one of them would have been the release of the independent findings to the public after they complete the results of the investigation. I think that needs to happen. That needs, no, I'm not talking about before the DA makes a decision.
That's not even asking for a lot. It's after.
Yes.
Once you're done, can we see?
Yeah, see what we pay for. Because again, you're not an arm of that law enforcement agency, so you should be beholden to the public. That's fair. The release of body cam footage within 72 hours of the incident, because a lot of times we get a sanitized version of what happened. Whether George Floyd, and that's him, he died of fentanyl intoxication, but then we later on we see a video. That's what the initial.
That was the initial one.
Initial police report is he died because of drug overdose. And then we see the video, and you see it's completely different. So we need to make sure that there's accurate reporting and reports of the investigation of what actually happened. To bring up Cobb County, there was another police involved shooting in Cobb County a couple days ago.
Supposedly.
Somebody who either reportedly reached for a gun, had a gun, did something with a gun. Okay, show us the body cam that proves what you said. Right. That's all we're asking for is the proof, instead of allowing law enforcement to be the first responder and to shape the narrative. Let's get the truth. Another one with the forest defender who was killed in the forest. Now there's an independent autopsy that reveals he was shot in both of his hands while he was in a crouching position with his legs crossed. You know, I have some serious questions now. Well, I had serious questions before, but I definitely have serious questions now. How is it that he was able to fire at law enforcement, but you shot him through both hands?
How do you even do that? Like,
well, that would indicate his hands were up.
oh yeah.
So, you know, having practiced law for a long time and being meticulous in details, you start to go through the narrative and you see there are holes in the narrative. Mm-hmm. And so I think, you know, if we're going to get to rebuilding public trust, we have to have transparency and accountability. It starts with the transparency.
Okay, before we maybe switch from this, is there anything that we should follow next? And I have a hard time myself keeping up with the onslaught of what I consider to be just misconduct by law enforcement. And it goes beyond police. It includes DAs who have been all manners of prosecuted and charged with doing things that usually involve bribery and political favors. I think this just happened in a different county in Georgia. It's slipping my mind now. Just a couple of years ago, there's a lot of law enforcement misconduct, and I consider prosecutors certainly to be law enforcement. Like, how do you as the chair of the NAACP keep up with, how does this happen? Is there a dashboard that lights up every day where you see these new incidents that happen? And like, how do you know even what to begin to
Well, I think even on that, I mean, for me, when we got down to the details of the Ahmaud Arbery case and you see the passing along and the calls that were made, I was like, certain things were just never in my scope of possibilities. Mm-hmm. And then when you see that kind of stuff happen, it's like, wait, y'all actually thought this was acceptable? And y'all actually thought this was cool to do? And that when it comes to life, it's like, wait, so you call you, and then you call them. And
you just have to have your spider senses on at all times. And the great thing about the information age that we're living in, you know, I just get up every morning, check Google, see what's happening, then check Twitter, see what's happening. Make sure I search in terms that would bring up Atlanta news, bring up Georgia news, bring up police news, bring up potential social justice news, and analyze it. And, you know, having been a defense attorney for 20 years, having been a lawyer for 20 years, I know what to look for. And so I think that we have to be more disciplined in our news ingestion. I always come to everything with a level of skepticism, especially if the first reporter and the first responder says, police say. Mm-hmm. Okay, my question is, what are the witnesses saying? Because typically the police respond to an incident and interview the witnesses who were the first-hand information gatherers. So what are the witnesses saying? And then once you get to the witnesses, now you can ascertain what actually happened. And so what I would tell your viewers is we have to be more discreet consumers of our media and our news and understand that everything has an ulterior motive or ulterior narrative. We have to search for the truth. And so what I typically do is if there's an issue that brought before the Georgia State Conference, I talk with the branch that brought the information. We go out to the scene like we did in Ahmaud Arbery. We start talking to the witnesses. You know, we got a copy of the tape before the tape was released. We kind of knew the New York Times was about to drop this whole scenario. We'd already been in contact with the family. And then we made sure that the world understood that what happened in Brunswick was not reflective of what Georgia law says about this type of incident. And then we held the McMichaels and William Roddy Bryant accountable for their actions. Now, it took several years. It took 74 days for everybody to uncover the cover-up. But, you know, at the end of the day, we are getting towards some semblance of justice. We haven't gotten to justice because true justice would be Ahmaud being with us. Right. But accountability is Travis and Gregory McMichael and William Roddy Bryant serving the rest of their natural lives in prison, and Jackie Johnson being held accountable. And trust and believe, we haven't forgot about Jackie Johnson. Oh, no. When they set the arraignment, which is interesting how long it's taken to set this arraignment, we will be present. And when she has her motions hearings and she has all of her pre-trials and her trial calendar and ultimately her trial, we'll be right there holding accountable.
Yeah. Well, that's an important note to end on, and that update for folks, because I know if you Google it now, the most recent thing you'll see is the mugshot and what next. That's it. So, okay, let's move to a new development. This is out of Texas. Essentially, the first case of its kind, it's believed, since Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, which overturned abortion rights precedent as of that moment. A Texas man has filed a wrongful death lawsuit against 3 friends of his ex-wife for allegedly helping her to obtain pills, which would induce an abortion. The lawsuit is seeking $1 million from each of the three and an injunction prohibiting them from distribution of abortion pills. The woman, his ex-wife in particular, is not a defendant in the lawsuit, and it relies heavily, the basis of this lawsuit relies heavily on information contained in text messages exchanged between his ex-wife and these friends, including one of those messages which says, y'all help means the world to me, end quote. I feel so lucky to have you as friends, end quote. This is the basis for a lot of the suit. But also, I think, even though this is a civil matter, we talked a lot about this when there was conversation about, well, what does this mean for criminal consequences in the future? Like, what will this look like?
Aiding and abetting and things.
Right. Like, will it look like, a person, made a phone call for someone, or a person gave a ride to someone somewhere, and then they end up like what does that look like for our already, again, overflooded court system? So even though this is a civil matter, I am very interested in your take on what you think this could mean, and if there's any potential for future criminal consequence, how in the heck would you even enforce a law like that?
I mean, you can't, and that's why the law is unconstitutional. But my question is, how is it that the ex-husband has standing to sue for wrongful death against the friends of the ex-wife? The standing would be the ex-wife.
You would think, yeah.
And so there are a host of civil issues with that very case, and I think it probably won't get past motion for summary judgment because you got to have standing. And so considering that the Supreme Court, even in the Dobbs decision, has not really stated when we officially recognize life as a precedent now. Right. I don't know how he has standing. So I think that's going to be litigated all the way up, and then we'll get a chance to see from the Supreme Court when life begins. Is it at is the insemination of the egg, or is it when we reach viability? These are all questions that I don't think that they have thought through. And then even then, who has standing? Because
True, yeah.
if life begins at inception, it's a minor. Mm-hmm. The minor's parent or parents would be the ones that have standing. Mm-hmm. In certain states like Georgia, if you're not married, you don't have parental rights. So a father wouldn't be able to sue. I'm not sure if the rights are the same in Texas. And in this case, we have an ex-husband.
That's true.
They're not in a current marital relationship.
Yeah, they're divorced since. Yeah.
So we got to go through that analysis to determine if he even had standing to sue. Yeah. And we're opening up a whole nother Pandora's box. Mm-hmm. So I think that people have to be very careful in trying to inject their religious beliefs, their personal beliefs, their morals into the law, because at that point we have serious consequences. So, I mean, if he's successful, now these three friends, none of which said, hey, I'm providing you these pills for you to do X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. This is her choice to make a decision to end the viability of that embryo or fetus or wherever it was at that point. And so I think it opens a host of legal issues that are going to have to be litigated, and our court system is already overcrowded with frivolous civil litigation, and I think that this would be one of them.
Yeah.
Are you done?
Yeah. Nothing else on that one, except Walgreens was also made the news, kind of related for its decision to stop dispersing similar medication to induce abortions. And California Governor Newsom has decided that there's no more room for Walgreens in this great state of California, and that he will be getting rid of Walgreens for that purpose. There's a lot of discussion about whether or not they have any power over that. And Walgreens, I think, has responded by saying their hands are tied. And I think there are legal experts saying that's not true. You absolutely have the discretion to continue distributing. So,
well, it depends on which state Walgreens is in. And again, these are the ancillary and collateral consequences of not really a full federal stance on where we are as far as reproductive rights. Now you got 50 different jurisdictions, some of which are criminalizing this.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm not saying what Walgreens is doing is correct, but if you're in Texas and now they're suing because somebody provided an abortion pill,
and you sell them,
and you sold it to the people who provided it, so now you're a defendant.
I'm even more liable.
Now you have legal liability, and then if they're criminalizing it, Now you could be potentially, if you're in Georgia, RICO conspiracy.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot
I
of.
hopped on a plane and gave my friend some pills. Well, now it's federal. Got to cross the state line.
It's a lot of issues that have to be litigated and the courts to determine. And I think we're opening the door and going in a direction that we don't know the end result of that direction.
I didn't think about that part. RICO is no joke.
No.
And these governors keep picking fights with places. I mean, like entities. It's like the whole Disney World thing we talked about last week. It's like,
well, if you're getting attention and your whole goal is to raise funds, you need to do things that are controversial. And so, taking on Disney because they're, quote, woke and fighting the left, whatever that means, when you're actually banning Black history, you're picking fights to get into the news cycle, to be able to fundraise, to get a high-profile name in national politics.
Yeah, I need to think about that part. The shock jock thing. Thanks, Trump. Yeah. The shock jock.
No, but the only thing I think worse than, at least for me, I'm thinking just practically, maybe selfishly, because selfishly, was not us deciding at a federal level, or if we even did objectively say this is when life begins, and we just completely not just overturn Roe v. Wade, but like make a definitive statement legally. My bigger fear was the idea that we'll leave it up to the states. That was even scarier to me. Just leave it up to the states, because that sounds like a whole cluster. Anytime something is like, to this day, I think it's ridiculous that there are different criminal statutes in every single state that we live in. Like, people don't leave their state. Like people don't cross state lines and something that should be legal here, but like 10 feet to the right, it's absolutely not. It's already too much.
Well, we've been there before. There was a whole war over what
is
legal in certain states as opposed to not legal in other states, and then compromises that
about
were
the intellectual capacity of the average human being to abide by 80,000 plus criminal statutes, let alone when they travel. It's just not even practical. It's just not even practical.
Dred Scott went on a train ride across state lines and thought he was free. So I'm just saying we've been down this road before. I think that we have to balance federal law with state law, but when it violates the federal constitution, then the federal government has to step in.
There.
Okay, so shifting right along,
Yes.
I want to start here because I actually watched the last episode we did with you, and there were a lot of things that y'all were requesting, almost demanding of Biden. Where do we sit with those things?
Some of the things are in process. Some of the things that he's done. So he's done an executive order on voting. He's empowered the Department of Justice to investigate, and in some places file lawsuits. He filed one in Texas, filed one in Georgia. As far as policing is concerned, he did sign an executive order on the federal level implementing certain aspects of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. But of course, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act did not pass. It has not passed the Senate. So it's in process. He's done as much as he can do with the executive orders. That doesn't mean we don't take the pressure off of him. Put pressure on the Senate to give us legislation. But we've had conversations with his administration about that. We've also had conversations with Brian Kemp's administration about things that they can do. So we're trying to have these conversations, and if it doesn't work, we'll file lawsuits. Just like we filed a lawsuit against the state of Georgia for SB 202, and we would have filed a lawsuit had SB 221 passed that banned all drop boxes. We are in the process of helping families in Georgia to deal with these police brutality issues, and when necessary, we will contact the Justice Department, as we have called for a federal patterns and practice investigation into the Atlanta police. So the short answer to your question, with his administration, they are attempting to do as much as they can do with their executive power. It's time for Congress to act.
What's on the NAACP agenda? Like, what should we be paying attention to? What are you guys focused on? Things of that magnitude.
Voting rights is number one on our agenda. Police accountability is number 1A on our agenda. Healthcare, as you know, the second to last level 1 trauma center, Atlanta Medical Center, closed. And so we have a serious issue in North Georgia with not having a level 1 trauma center. It's outside of Grady. We're dealing with economic investment, trying to make sure that the federal dollars that are coming down and the state contracts that are coming down are equitably distributed to minority communities, particularly African-American minority communities. So those are just a few of the things that are on our radar. Of course, increasing membership. Membership is the lifeblood of the NAACP. You can, for $30 a year, cause as much hell as you want to. So shameless plug for the NAACP.
You really phrase it like that.
Hey, yeah, that's the way I phrased it. I'm a troublemaker. But those are some of the things that are on our agenda. We are, again, we've gone over crossover day, and we're in the home stretch of the legislative session here in Georgia. I believe March the 29th is the last day of legislative session. So we got our eyes on a lot of bills, some that would help, some that potentially could hurt. But those are the things that we are focused on, and we want people to keep their eyes on the legislative session because, it's been quiet, so to speak, as separated from other legislative sessions. You don't have, reproductive rights trying to be drawn back because they already have been. You don't have voting rights trying to be drawn back because they already have been. So it's been kind of quiet. You did have the Don't Say Gay bill, which didn't pass. You do have a school voucher bill out there that is quite dangerous. But there, for the most part, we're focused on protecting our voting rights through our lawsuits and through our civic engagement and dealing with police accountability through enforcement at the local level, getting the Department of Justice to come in on the federal level.
Explain this voucher bill. I haven't heard. So
there's an attempt to carve out funds that are sent to from the Department of Education. I think it's $6,000 a student to allow them to go to the private school of their choice.
Oh, Lord. I knew this was going to be a charter school.
Yeah, of course, throughout the state of Georgia. And if you've taken out $6,000 out of the public school for each student, now your schools are even more underfunded. And so we believe this is another attempt to gut public education instead of funding public education. So the NAACP is against any voucher program, any school choice program that cuts the funding for our educational public educational system.
I think so. So the progress of that, right? It's made it past its first house because crossover day is almost like the big deadline for every state. Almost every state I think has one, except maybe Michigan. It has passed the Senate now.
Well, looks like it's headed to the governor's desk, and we will be having a conversation again with the governor. But these are the things that, these are our priorities. And of course, defending the rights of African Americans and people of color from any form of discrimination is always number one. But those are the things we're focused on.
I wanted to ask for the voting piece. So, very important. I don't know how you feel about turnout preceding this most recent gubernatorial election, but I would love to get your thoughts on what the future could look like. I don't know if it's too melancholy to start with what you think may have went wrong, just purely politically, just curious about your thoughts. But there was so much conversation I feel like we had about Stacey Abrams after actually even leading up to 2018. There was like even 2018, 2019, I felt like 2020 was like the year of Stacey Abrams, quite frankly. So I just would love to know what you think about how the election shook down and like if voting, if maybe part of this, if there's a voting strategy for the next gubernatorial election in Georgia, that's a part of this platform.
Well, let me first say this. I'm the president of the state conference, so I'm going to take my president of the state conference hat off because we don't engage in partisan politics.
Sure.
I'm a friend of Stacey. Okay. And, I was hopeful, she would have been a great leader for Georgia, but Georgians spoke. And I think that, whoever wants to win the highest seat in Georgia has to stay engaged in Georgia. And so I think the main problem from what I heard from the ground, and again, I'm a friend of Stacey. I wouldn't say this to anyone if I hadn't said it already to that person. I think that the biggest issue was people felt like she had disengaged with Georgia and was not on the ground enough. And I think that, that's a valid critique. I do also think that people weren't focused on what the overall goal was. And so I just think that whoever's going to run for that top seat, in 3.5 years from now, needs to make sure that they are hyper-focused on Georgia.
Yeah.
You can be a national figure, but if you're not hyper focused on Georgia, it's going to be difficult to win a statewide race.
I think that's what I was telling. We talked about. It was the optics. It looked like Stacey had been touring all around the country, and then at the last minute, it was like, "Oh, I need to get in Atlanta," and you started seeing her everywhere, some of the weirdest places. Which I understood it, but
well, here's a bigger problem. Georgia's not just Atlanta.
This is very
and
true.
so
Very fair.
I hear it all the time. Our constituents that live below Macon feel like they don't get enough attention, and I agree with them.
Yeah.
So if you're going to be a national candidate in Georgia, you need to go to Macon. You need to go to Columbus. You need to go to Valdosta. You need to go to Brunswick. You need to go to Savannah.
Albany.
You need to go to Albany. You need to go over to Augusta. You definitely need to go up in North Georgia into the mountains. You got to cover the whole state. It's a big state. Trust me, my car has a lot of miles
Too
on
many
it.
counties.
I always forget that somebody sees
159 counties.
159
Yeah, so
counties.
Georgia's not a monolith, okay? You can go to almost every type of geography in Georgia except for a desert.
Yeah.
And so, you got to understand it's a big state. People want their regional issues addressed. The same issues, the issues in Columbus are not the same as the issues in Atlanta.
Nope.
And so I think that's what
even the issues in Richmond, right next, they'll tell you, well, that ain't here. We don't do that here. Like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about?
Yeah,
and people would get mad at you.
They do.
Y'all trying to bring them Atlanta politics down here. We don't like that. We don't like Atlanta. I'm like, wow, you do understand the same things that are happening in Atlanta are happening. Yeah, but we don't. You from Atlanta, and so that people have to understand that. And so again, as her friend, I was saddened to see her not win. But I think that, greater things are ahead for Leader Abrams. I look forward to her doing the great things she's doing and continuing to fight for voting rights. I look forward to working with her. And now I'm going to put my NAACP hat back on. And what I would just say to any politician in Georgia, that you need to talk to black voters.
Literally.
Because Georgia didn't turn blue. It turned black. And it's still black.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. And we were also talking about some of the other races as well, like certainly first black sheriff in Cobb County. We were talking about the first Latina DA over in Gwinnett. Latina? No, Patsy.
Patsy black in Gwinnett, but the first Latina is in Athens, Clark County.
Thank you.
Deborah Gonzalez.
That's right. So there was very, very much, I think, a great, maybe a judicial officer shift in a sense between DAs and between sheriffs. That wasn't the only sheriff's race I wanted to note about, but that was also, I think, that was great to see. I thought we'll see, I suppose, because there's still plenty of time left.
So I guess would you say it was a good turnout?
It was a very good turnout, both in the general election and the runoff. I think, we can push the margins higher, but the fact that they wanted to end the runoff system
I saw that.
showed
I was
you
like,
how
really?
high turnout was. Because again, if Georgia shows up, Georgia's not blue, it's black, and the black people want to be heard. And so I think from down in Valdosta all the way to Macon, there's a black belt right there, and then of course Metro Atlanta, it's a whole chocolate island right there. And I think that any politician that doesn't speak to that constituency will lose. And so as we build for 2024, in a presidential race, I'm seeing a lot of folks jumping into this presidential race on the Republican side.
Yeah.
Who are going to have a real hard time winning Georgia.
That's true.
This is true.
Matter of fact, I have a message for one of them. Ron, listen, cut out the culture wars.
Okay.
Because you got to win Georgia to win the presidency. So let's get back to governing that impacts everybody, because it's not 1850 and it's not 1950. So there's a certain former president who lost Georgia and probably is going to go to jail for the stuff he did in Georgia. So I would just say, it may play to Idaho or Iowa.
Yeah.
But when you come to Georgia and you come through this black belt, stop all the banning of black history, taking the books out.
Changing terms.
Because the Florida blueprint not going to work in Georgia.
Absolutely.
Facts.
Oh, I'm so disturbed by Florida.
I don't know. I don't know what's worse. Is it Texas or Florida? I don't know which one is worse.
Texas is bad,
Yeah,
but Florida, they're trying to put a corporate kind of swing on that. It's diet racism.
Yeah.
What is diet racism?
Diet racism.
Strange.
Yeah, diet
Kinda
racism.
strange.
Yes.
You know,
Racism zero.
Yeah.
What are we saying? Okay.
I feel like when I see Texas, I see vigilantes and outlaws and just the kind of Just
call it Django. That's what I see.
But when I see
Django
Florida,
when
I
Texas.
see hillbillies and strange
In Florida,
strange levels of corruption. Just weird corruption that takes creativity. I think. Just why? It's a little strange.
The things they take stance on are just crazy.
Right.
Like when we discussed that drag bill in Tennessee. It's like, this is what y'all decided to take a stance on?
They just want to fight culture wars, and people don't care about culture wars. They want to care about, kitchen table issues. And particularly black people don't want to have to worry about whether or not we're going to have to litigate a fight that our grandparents were fighting.
Literally.
It's 2023. It's not
Exactly.
It's not 1823. It's not 1923.
I don't think they got the memo.
I don't think they did either, but I think in
can't do it
2024
that way.
they're going to find out again because they keep thinking. They thought in 2018, oh, that couldn't happen again. Then in 2020, oh, that couldn't happen again. Then 2022, oh, that couldn't happen again. Now we're retooling in 2023 to get ready for 2024.
And I just think ultimately culture wars aren't really won piece of paper by piece of paper at any rate. I think that they're won in art. I think culture wars are won in art and entertainment over time. I just don't think you can sign as many pieces of paper as you want to because you're angry,
Yes.
and it makes everybody else happy. Like, yeah, we're signing these pieces of paper, but you don't kill gender and gender identity with pieces of paper.
And you certainly don't stop social justice with pieces of paper. I mean,
No.
our ancestors marched and protested when it was illegal to sit, to read, but to sit on buses, integrated and sit on lunch counters. We know how to deal with this when you legislate things. And so you may make a certain demographic happy.
Yeah.
The 65 and up.
Right.
But, and this may be an unpopular statement I'm about to make, but, the 18 to 30 have a higher likelihood of being around
Yeah.
for 2024 and beyond.
We're discussing mortality now.
I'm just saying.
Discussing mortality now.
At some point, you gotta have a message for the next generation because they have a higher likelihood of being the base of voters.
For sure.
And they're detached from these old ideologies. They're not really trying to. If it doesn't make sense to them, they're ready to fight. If it doesn't make sense, they're not trying to hear it. You can't use rhetoric. They're not trying to hear it. This does not make sense. How is this valid?
Right.
That's where they sit on a lot of these topics. So it's been interesting to watch them.
Well, here's the thing I saw on social media that really shook me. 1993 was 30 years ago.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I graduated high
Yeah,
school
the
in
80s
97.
was 40 years ago.
So why are we having a conversation about 1950s politics when 1993 was 30 years ago?
Jesus, I was just getting into
Oh,
high
yeah.
school. Good
Oh yeah.
God. You just had to say that.
just had to
That
say
has
that.
really hit home. I was like, Jesus, I was
Yeah.
just getting into high school in
It's
93.
always humbling to me to watch these videos or watch like Gen X and younger, even like the Alpha generation, and look at old Mariah Carey videos and think, oh my God, this is like so old
This is
school. I didn't know
so
she could
old.
sing like that. I was so confused.
The fact that
just like-
most of them did not know that Candy was in a girl group.
Wait, they didn't know Candy was in
They
Escape?
did not know.
Most people
Everybody
don't.
thought Candy was a
Most people
housewife
don't.
at all. That's it. Until Escape came back out and it was like, wait, Candy was in a group? That's where we're at now.
Yeah.
That's
And
where we're at.
what happens when that generation wakes up and realize, hey, they trying to put us back in chains?
Literally.
Literally.
Yeah.
You'll see really quickly, because you like TikTok. Did you
Oh, I
see
love
what's
TikTok.
happening?
What's happening on TikTok?
They're
What isn't happening on TikTok? There's so much happening on TikTok.
No, they're trying to get power to, I think, the president to ban TikTok. There's something
was Canada,
circulating
right?
around. Huh?
That was in Canada, wasn't it?
No, that's here. I have it somewhere. I meant to bring it up.
Well, I mean, they've banned it on federal phones and state phones here in Georgia. But, I mean, you're not going to stop TikTok. I mean,
Well, that's having a government job.
I mean, they're just going to shift to the issue is TikTok's algorithm is wide open. so you can get your message out.
It's a great platform.
It is a great platform. I love TikTok. I mean, y'all seen the dude, Mama, don't worry, I'm a gangster, I'm a provider. I mean, that keeps going on my timeline.
Are you serious right now?
Yes.
I love watching these two very nice white rednecks sing R&B music. They go out in the
I've seen that one too. I've seen that one too.
I just want to say that the both of them have too much free time. I
I've
just
seen
want to
that
point
one
that out
too.
while they go at it.
It's hilarious.
It's
It's hilarious.
Y'all have too much free time.
But what people need to understand, that's where the children are. The kids, not children. I'm sorry. The kids. Y'all are not children.
Yeah,
kids are. And it's entertainment. I mean, you just know what's going to go viral, what's funny, and you can also get these police brutality stories out. And so I just think that instead of trying to ban TikTok, they need to come into the conception that the internet is TV.
They absolutely do. Also, just like even to go further than that, I think there's the idea that you can like play whack-a-mole on all of these things that you're not familiar with. It's just a stupid long-term strategy. The question is like, what are you giving to people, right? Like instead of trying to ban universal basic income or stop, social healthcare from being socialized, it's like, where are the solutions and the proactivity and the how do I prevent people from even like needing what they currently need?
But that requires foresight.
I'm just
to
saying.
Look at the next generation. But they're looking at the previous generation. They're talking about the golden age, 1950. It wasn't golden. It wasn't golden.
That.
But what I can tell you, this vibranium generation is coming. I'm focused on that.
I'm saying
vibranium generation. Yes. They building Wakanda. I'm looking for Wakanda.
Let's talk about that too, because I think maybe the biggest social issue that I see a lot of young people engaging with is honestly gun violence.
Yes,
and it's not necessarily police brutality, but I think gun violence moreover, right? And we were having a conversation about the most recent mass shooting and talking about how 3 or 4 of the young people involved had already experienced and survived a mass shooting, and so I am kind of curious about.
So you're talking about Michigan.
Yeah, I'm talking about Michigan.
Okay,
yeah. And then I think, but I also just think, this ongoing conversation that I swore had so much momentum a couple of months ago about, well, what are we actually going to do here? I feel like so much of it has slowed. And again, it becomes this big state control or states' rights issue in so many ways. I would love to know either what the NAACP's take is or what your take is on like those real next steps and like how urgent. Do you feel like they're urgent? Do you feel like the conversation is quieting?
Absolutely, it's urgent. And I mean, what I think people need to understand is we are in a gun violence pandemic, and it's affecting Black communities and minority communities disproportionately. So the NAACP, through the leadership of President Derek Johnson, has launched initiatives on the state level to pass common sense gun regulation. Now, in the federal level, they did pass a bipartisan effort. It didn't really go far enough, but they are trying. We are pushing for the banning of all assault rifles and high-capacity magazines and laser scopes and all these things that are weapons of war. But the real conversation is going to come down to pressure. And when I asked you, were we talking about Michigan? There have been so many. But it shocked me when one of the students from the Michigan shooting had been the victim in Newtown.
Yeah.
Oh, good Lord.
It's like.
Well, we were worried about the seeds that were planted from the people that survived these things.
I was going to say, that's a whole nother conversation, too. There's trauma involved with surviving. I mean, the trauma involved in surviving things like this as well. But getting to the point where 1 out of every couple of dozen people have survived some sort of a gun violence incident is remarkable. And I hate, and I hope it doesn't continue for long. I felt like the conversation for a long time was becoming, well, what about this type of violence? Or what about that type of violence? And it was almost like a comparison of like, are we almost like, violence happens in communities all the time and nobody's concerned about it. It's like, well, that's bad too. Like that's bad too. We don't need to compare,
the lesser of two evils.
Right. Well, there's street violence and nobody's trying to legislate away, AK-47s. Well, we should though.
Well, technically we are trying to legislate away AK-47s. And I think when we get into the whataboutism, because they always like to say, well, what about the crime in Chicago? We don't live in Chicago.
No.
Okay, we live in Georgia where guns are available everywhere because the governor signed the guns everywhere bill, constitutional carry, everybody's carrying a gun. But now everybody's shocked that people are getting shot.
Right.
I mean, just saying, you arm the citizenry. You say everybody can have a gun, you don't need a license to conceal it, and then you magically get shocked that, shootings may be up. Which actually, shootings in Atlanta are down. But
Yeah.
and so having this real conversation about what legislative change, because policy drives behavior. If I have more of an ability to have access to a weapon, I'm more likely to use the weapon. But then we have community responses. My good friend Scotty Smart launched Square Up, Guns Down. It was a boxing initiative where we're teaching young people to resolve conflict, not through guns, but maybe not just boxing, but just to be able to have conflict resolution and think about something other than gun violence. So there are initiatives out there. We at the NAACP will partner with anybody to have this conversation about gun violence in the African American community. But we also need to have a policy-driven conversation with our elected officials, because you can't just have thoughts and prayers and tweets
Again.
over and over and over again. And it's only a matter of time. We had the spa shooting, but it's only a matter of time before there's a mass shooting in Atlanta, in Georgia, where the governor and others are going to have to respond to why they pass guns everywhere.
And it really just needs to be, I think, a general conversation. I feel like at this point, it should be critical race theory. It should be critical violence theory. It should just be a total educational component of conflict resolution. Whatever other GVI initiatives or interventions can be taught, they should be taught for everyone, because we're not doing these mass shootings in large part.
No, typically we're not the ones doing
Girls and women aren't doing mass shootings in large part.
And black people aren't doing the mass shootings. They typically shoot each other. They don't typically shoot a whole lot of people.
That's very true. Yeah. That's very true. But it's also, I think, a highly gendered issue. Yeah. So I think there's a lot to be said about this just being general education, period.
That's a conversation I would love to see them have. Oh, yeah, so we need to talk about the young white boys that are here killing folks and shooting folks and mass thing. I would love to hear that conversation and see where that goes. But that's probably not going to happen.
Actually, we can do it.
We can do it at Cop City. And on that note, we can do it at Cop City. On that note, final thoughts.
My final thoughts is always great to be with you guys and have a robust conversation about what's happening in the community, how we can push back, how we can fight back, how we can make sure that things are going in the right direction as opposed to going back into ancient history. And so I just think people should get organized. We can be outraged, but we got to get organized, and then we have to mobilize. So if you aren't in an organization, feel free to come to the NAACP, Georgia NAACP on all platforms, www.georgianaacp.org on the web, or you can follow me at all things at Attorney Gerald Griggs, Attorney Griggs on all social platforms, Gerald Griggs, GeraldAGriggs.com on the web. And we have to be our ancestors' wildest dreams. A couple of more of our ancestors passed on. Reverend R.L. White passed. He was a former president of the Atlanta NAACP before President Rose. And my mentor, Tommy Deutsch, passed away. He was the national chairman of the 100 Black Men. Wow. When we start seeing lions of the movement pass, it's time for us to step up and make sure that we are marshaling the next generation to make sure they have more rights than we did. And so that's why it's important to join the NAACP. It's important to join the movement. It's important to make sure you're fighting back and not just sitting on the sidelines wondering who's going to do the work.
I love that. I want to completely leave that there. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate always that you come and remind people how important it is to be vigilant and to remain engaged and active, because so much of the conversation sometimes, especially with young people, can turn into, oh, it's so exhausting and I'm just tired. But the truth is, there is no making it when it comes to something like this. Like, I think there's a quote that as long as the legislature's in session, we ain't safe. And that's just always going to be the case to an extent. Like, there has to be this continued interest in the community that you live in the world that you live in. So I appreciate you saying that and, letting people know that this is just the work of being alive and wanting to be alive as long as possible. This is just what it is. I'm also a member, an official member. You could Google my membership as active. I am a member of the NAACP in Georgia, so.
We appreciate that.
Okay, well, I clearly need to become one. I think the one thing I'm taking away from this is I can raise all the hell I want for $30-something.
$30 a year. If you want a lifetime of raising hell, $750 for a bronze life membership. Silver life membership is bronze life membership is $750. Yeah, Silver Life member is $1,500. Gold Life membership is $2,500. And for $5,000, you can get the Platinum. That's the W.E.B. Du Bois. That's the Thurgood Marshall. Y'all on a different level.
Name
Vibranium. Yeah, name on the website. Member. But seriously, y'all, this is the fight of our lifetime. And we don't want our great-grandkids to sit back and watch on the internet their grandparents tweeting and stuff, talking about, oh, I'm just so tired and I gave up. And that's why they in chains.
Literally.
Because our four parents decided that they were going to fight, period, point blank. They never stopped fighting. They never, well, a couple of them got tired, but they never got tired to the point they stopped.
Right.
We have to continue to progress. And we've come a long, then that's one thing I want to push back on. We've come a long way.
Yes.
A long way. But we are not at the goal. Let's get to the goal in this generation.
All right. And on that note, we'll see you same time, same place on the Leadership Been Live podcast with your host, Ricardo D. Rice.
Got it.
Thank you, Anish.